Please be seated. Good, good evening. I would like to welcome you all to this extraordinary Council Assembly meeting. I am Councillor Naima Ali, the Mayor of Southwark and the Chair of this meeting. In accordance with Council Assembly Procedure Rule 3.1D, this meeting has been called in response to the request from 5 councillors to consider a specific matter of business. We shall now move on to the meeting business. Item 1.2, following consultation with the group whip of mayor's briefing, the program motion was considered and copies have been circulated. It set out one amendment on item 2.1. I would like to move to the vote on the program motion. Is this agreed? Thank you. Do any member wish to make any declaration of interest? When making your declaration, can you please specify if it is a disclosable pecuniary interest? I have received apologies for absence from Councillor Rachel Bentley, Emily Hickson, Laura Johnson, Leo Pollack, Kesia Harper, Victoria Mill, Mohammed Dean, Esme Dobson, and Maria Lingford. Yeah. Oh, thank you. We are now moving to item 2.1, extraordinary motion, judgment of the regulator of social housing and council's response to judgment. Councillor Victor Chamberlain, to move motion 1. You have 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This extraordinary meeting is appropriately named. Members of the council have not called for such a meeting in 15 years, but the crisis in Southwark's housing is so grave and the administration's response so poor that we have been left with no choice but to demand urgent action. The regulator of social housing has now confirmed what residents have known for years. The Labour Council is failing tenants. Southwark has been awarded a C3 grading, the second lowest possible rating, for serious failings in meeting even the most basic of housing standards. When the regulator announced its investigation, after we publicly called for Southwark to be prioritised under these new powers, we all knew that what they would find would not be good. But even expecting the worst, seeing the findings in black and white was still shocking. Half our 37,000 homes do not have a smoke alarm. That is 18,500 homes which also do not have an up-to-date electrical safety certificate. There are 11,000 homes and families in our borough that we as an authority are failing to even meet the most basic decent home standard. Nearly 2,000 homes are overdue fire safety remedial actions. And it comes as no surprise at all to learn that the regulator shared our concerns about information sharing and transparency. We have seen it time and time again from this administration. Even after this report, even after years of complaints, leaseholders and tenants hitting brick wall after brick wall, just trying to get answers, just trying to understand why their homes are so unsafe, why repairs take so long, why service charges keep rising, but services get worse. Madam Mayor, and if you want to understand just how badly trust has been broken, then you only needed to attend the Southwark Tenants Conference as we did last Saturday. It was a full room of 4,000 people most affected by this administration's failures. And yet, where were the councillors responsible for this mess? They were nowhere to be seen. Not even the strategic director could turn up to defend this failing administration. And the response from residents was fury. One tenant stood up and asked for a show of hands on who trusted this council. And what happened, Madam Mayor? A sea of hands went up, not in support, but in complete rejection. Not a handful, not a majority, a unanimous message, Madam Mayor, from tenants. They do not trust this administration. And one resident put it bluntly, Southwark needs to go through a huge culture change. And let's be clear, this isn't about austerity. Peter Apps, the award-winning journalist who's covered and exposed fire safety failures across the country, expressed his concern about Southwark. It is utterly damning anywhere, but especially in the borough, which lost 6 residents in the Lacanau House fire. I do not regard austerity as an excuse here. Southwark has been taking the rents from these homes into the ring-fenced housing revenue account. They should have been spending them on smoke alarms before whatever else they've been spent on. Southwark council tenants have paid their rents. The money was there, and yet somehow this council chose not to spend it on the most basic safety measures. And what makes it worse, the Labour leadership knew all along that things were this bad. They stood up and said it. In 2018, Councillor Cryan told us that Southwark was above and beyond on fire safety. In 2020, the current council leader, Kieran Williams, claimed that Southwark was one of the best and most robust for fire safety. We now have the facts. So I ask you, where is that political accountability? Because the failures don't stop with fire safety. District heating breakdowns, major work disasters, housing ombudsman complaints piling up, tens of thousands of pounds in compensation paid out for poor service. And yet we have the same people responsible still in charge. That is why we are moving the motion tonight, because it cannot be right that those who have repeatedly overseen housing failures of this magnitude over years, across multiple scandals, across multiple departments, are still serving in positions to get us out of this mess. And yet there will be people opposite, members in this chamber, who will vote for more complacency. There are members who will support the amendment to water down this motion, to delay real change. Let me tell you this, you would be gaslighting your residents.
60 seconds remaining.
Because if you believe, like we do, that Southwark deserves better, that our tenants deserve better, then stand with the Liberal Democrats tonight. Time for apologies is over. The time for excuses is over. Enough is enough. I move the motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Emily Tester, to second motion 1. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Chamberlain has outlined the main reason that we're here, which is the findings of serious failings by the regulator of social housing. That is serious enough, but this is just the latest in a series of housing scandals and failures. The regulator's findings expose a pattern of political failures that are nothing short of catastrophic. The Canada Estate, Devon Mansions, Arica House and Kirby Estate in my ward are just 4 estates where combined overspends reach almost £10 million. It's not fair that leaseholders have been sent on a wild goose chase, almost taking on a part-time job in their attempts to hold the council to account. I'd describe them as banging their head against a brick wall, but knowing Southwark Labour, it would probably fall down. Residents have been forced to conduct their own investigations into the unacceptable quality of major works, and only when they were brought to the attention of OSC or Council Assembly was anything done about it. Even then, clear lessons have not been learned. A year later, and the Consort Estate was served the Section 20 notice that looked to repeat the identical mistakes of previous major work scandals. Again, only when it came to OSC and the council did the council make any concessions that leaseholders were right. Is it any wonder why the HRA is on such a knife edge when seemingly it takes teams of leaseholders coming together to challenge even the most obvious overcharging from contractors? Council dithering over fire safety certificates has left some leaseholders trapped in their flats, unable to sell because of massive delays. District heating failures have left tenants facing repeated outages during dangerously cold weather, or heating left permanently on with open windows, and that's the only way they can keep their houses at a comfortable temperature. And again, when leaseholders sought to challenge the eye-watering costs being charged to them, they found a council has turned their back on them. They are forced to use FOIs and have to use their own time and money to expose failures the council should have already been on top of. All of this is against a backlog of repeated ombudsman findings of severe maladministration. Last year, you paid nearly 100k on compensation ordered by the ombudsman. It couldn't be clearer. Things are getting worse. And at every stage, all we get is apologies and promises to do better. And at some point, we have to say, no more apologies, no more excuses. Enough is enough. And I second this motion.
Thank you. There is one amendment to the motion. Councillor Sarah King to move Amendment A. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Housing in Southwark and across London is in crisis. Today's motion from the Lib Dems, much like all of those that have come before it, simply fails to recognise the reality of that. So in fear of sounding like a broken record at Council Assembly, in proposing our amendment, I wanted to start by reiterating the challenges we, our tenants and our leaseholders face. Much needed new regulations have come into force. Consumer standards, fire safety and building safety, with heat network regulations due later this year. All of these are designed to deliver a higher quality of service, but none of them come with new financial support. That's on a backdrop of an HRA under exceptional pressure due to the political decisions of Conservative governments initially propped up by the Lib Dems, which have starved us of our income and caused our costs to spiral out of control. This context makes it really difficult, but it doesn't excuse the recent regulatory judgment, a judgment that deemed we had seriously failed on delivering new consumer standards and that significant improvement is needed. That's why the response of the Housing Department has been so significant. My priority and that of our administration is making the change that is needed to be a good landlord. Although still under development, our Good Landlord Plan includes the significant action needed to address the regulator's concerns and deliver on residents' priorities. It will build on the work already undertaken, repair action days like today's on the Apon estate, the new damp and mould service, and the root and branch review of the department which took place in advance of the planned inspection. It includes a detailed plan to address the regulator's findings, electrical safety checks, installing smoke alarms, a comprehensive stock condition survey, a new allocations policy, a new resident engagement strategy. It details how £250 million of funding will be invested in homes and estates over the next 3 years, making them safer and healthier. It will strive to restore trust in the council as a landlord and commits us to far greater levels of transparency. It is a plan that recognises the enormous dedication of our tenants and leaseholders. Our landlord services will always be stronger and of higher quality with the support of our tenants. To restore trust, it's essential that tenants are in the driving seat. The next phase of the plan will be giving our tenants the opportunity to shape that plan further and strengthen it.
30 seconds remaining.
And it's why we're establishing a new housing management board, chaired and made up of tenants, to hold us to account directly on our delivery, rather than consultants or retired chief executives. None of us underestimate the amount of work needed and the challenges ahead. And that's why I'm so proud to propose an amendment which both recognises the scale of the challenge and the concrete actions to deliver that change, in contrast to a motion of baseless accusations designed to create social media content.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Richard Livingston to second Amendment A. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Like Councillor Tester, I'd like to describe some current housing cases of tenants in Southwark. There's the woman in Surrey Docks Ward who's been without an entire living room ceiling and its lighting due to leaks for over a year. There's the man in West Bermondsey finding life in his flat unbearable for 5 years due to his neighbour below him carrying out DIY at all hours and a neighbour above doing all the same with his all-night parties. Yet when he raised these issues, the landlord sent around 3 heavies to demand he stop complaining. Or there are the 2 women in Borough and Bankside who, when they complained about the violence and threats from their local drug dealers, their landlord's response was to invite them to a public meeting so that the dealers could find out precisely who'd been complaining. Of course, none of these are tenants of Southwark Council, but of housing associations. I don't think any of these cases would happen in the council's tenants, but it does speak to the general pressures and the crisis of social housing throughout the sector, driven by its funding challenges. 2/3 of councils fear a collapse in their housing budgets, and that's why this council led a report with 108 others to find a more sustainable model. That doesn't mean that Southwark shouldn't strive to do better than the rest. A decade ago, I was doing Councillor King's job. I know how hard she is working to tackle the issues raised by the regulator of social housing and to improve our housing service more generally. And I also know from my own 2 years how hard a job it can be. Just as you think you're getting to grips with an improvement strategy in one area, a crisis will occur somewhere else needing your attention. It may be the toughest gig in local politics. I don't disagree with the call for greater tenant involvement. In fact, I think a louder voice for tenants is vital to improving our service. I've always been a great fan of TMOs and how the power handed to tenants can improve housing. As a ward councillor, I'm immensely proud of how residents on Tustin Estate have led the way with their manifesto for rebuilding the estate. However, I think the Lib Dem motion is a very bad way of going about it. When I talked to tenants at Saturday's tenants conference, what was abundantly clear is they actually want politicians to exert more influence over our housing officers, not to hand that power over to a body that would be incapable of having that same day-to-day role that Councillor King has over housing. And it does seem very strange that in the same evening the Lib Dems have been calling for cuts to bureaucracy and consultants. Their proposal is to create a new bit of council bureaucracy chaired by a, no doubt, very highly paid consultant. Debating a motion in a theatre of council assembly isn't the best way to improve council.
You have 30 seconds.
We all know that. We have a scrutiny process. We have a housing scrutiny commission. There's a far better place to get the right answers. The Lib Dems know that, but instead they've sadly opted to try and score a few cheap political points tonight. So let's vote for tonight's amendment, but let's not waste too much time talking about this in this environment when we know this isn't the best place to do this. Let's just vote for the amendment and let's get on with the evening and the vote.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Maggie.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Under Council Assembly Procedural Rules 1.14.25, Section B, I move that the question be now put.
Yeah, please. Let her finish first what she wanted to discuss.
If anybody is seconding the motion,
Is anyone seconding that?
Councillor Hartley has seconded the motion.
Yeah, Councillor Hartley has seconded the motion. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, Madam Mayor, the motion has been moved under section Councillor Assembly Procedure 1.4.10.25B that the question be now put. So we go to a vote. So those in favor of the motion has also been seconded by Councillor John Hartley. Those in favor of the motion that we go to a vote, can you please indicate? (45), Madam Mayor. Those against the motion? 8, Madam Mayor. So the motion has been carried and we'll now go to vote on the motion. Yeah. We also have a right of reply from Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you. I mean, I have to say, closing down debate is exactly what's got us into this mess. It's exactly why residents are so fuming. It's why every single person, every single resident that came to that Southwark Tenants Conference voted to say they had no confidence in this administration. We've heard a lot from you lot about, excuses, deflections, but yet more promises. But what we haven't heard is accountability. The regulator's judgment is damning. It exposes serious failings that have been put thousands of residents at risk. And yet, instead of facing up and instead of being honest with us tonight, what we've got is an amendment and a closing down of debate that gaslights tenants into believing that progress is being made and that you've got the answers. You don't. We've heard about a new plan, a new board, a new strategy, but tenants have heard it all before. The council promised action after Grenfell. It promised one of the strongest fire strategy approaches in the country. And yet here we are, half of homes without a smoke alarm, thousands of overdue fire safety actions, and the third highest number of housing complaints in the whole country, Madam Mayor. This is not leadership, this is failure. I have huge respect for Councillor King. She knows her job, she knows her brief, but she's been sent out as the fall guy to defend the indefensible. It's not fair. And I think, I'm sorry that you've had to do that, Councillor King. But let's be absolutely clear. This is not about austerity. Peter Apt said it. This council had the money. It failed to do it. That is bad administration. That is not, we can't just keep pointing the blame. What is unacceptable is Labour councillors closing their ranks now to protect themselves, to protect this leadership, rather than standing up for the residents that you were elected to serve. If you do vote for that amendment tonight, You are endorsing failure, and we will let your residents know. You are telling tenants that this is acceptable behaviour, that they should trust the same people that have failed them time and time again. You are telling your constituents to choose complacency over action. But if you vote for our motion, you are saying enough is enough. The time for apologies is over. The time for excuses is over. Vote for real accountability. Vote for the motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
We shall now move to the vote on Amendment A. Sorry, my voice is kind of today. Hoarse voice we call it. I shall now move to the vote on Amendment A to motion 1. Those in favor of Amendment A,
Madam Mayor.
those against,
8, Madam Mayor.
any abstentions?
No.
The amendment is carried. I shall now move to the vote on motion 1 as amended. Those in favor of motion 1 as amended,
45, Madam Mayor.
those against,
8, Madam Mayor.
any abstentions? The motion is carried. Thank you. That was the last item of business.